I cede to the people to ask any questions because the
Okay.
nature of the principle is shared.
Okay. Let me see. Taxation. This question. Well, how does this apply? Abiyomi Ross says, how does this apply to Canada?
It applies to all governments. And keep in mind that Canada and the United States Corporation have the same international number. They both come under the Circle Church and Chancery and the Queen of England. The idea that most people have that these are separate jurisdictions, that is more for the public than the fact. In other words, they're actually in partnership, pretending to be separate jurisdictions only for the public.
And
But in
also,
fact, they are conjoined members of the Roman Curia.
and they also appear to have very strained trade deals, but like you said, they are one and the same.
They are, yes, yes. And if you notice, often when they're making any public announcements, they will emphasize the distinction of the jurisdictions as different nation states. When the prime ministers of Canada knows that president is a corporate construct and not a national construct. And this is very important for people to comprehend that. And this is back to, again, even the problem that we have among our people always talking about nation of this, nation of that, and then not teach nationality, and they have never gone challenged. They have never been challenged. And it is a violation, a severe mental, social, and political violation against the people to talk about anything concerning nation, self-determination, etc., and not tell the truth about nationality. It is a horrible violation against the people. And of course, because that violation has been inculcated in society, you can see why many people are not even aware of how these things apply or don't apply, and that they never applied to them factually in the first place, and that they were allowed to be imposed upon them as application is part of the fraud. And of course, the people themselves must reclaim their estate. They must be willing. It's sort of like this. How would it be that anyone would be willing to defend the birthright of any man, woman, or woman who is not willing to stand up for their own birthright? And it be the obligation of another to stand in defense of someone who is unwilling to defend themselves, when that is a divine right, a divine obligation. And this is back to even like if people would, for those who have been taught some fundamental civics in a civic order, as such as say the Moorish Temple of Science, they would look in the Circle 7 Quran as an example, chapter 29, to get also a concept of the sovereignty of the people. And those as fundamental civic principle, and that applies to people in general. So don't look at it because it's coming from active or conscious Moors that it applies to us and doesn't apply to others. It applies to everyone. It is universal in its character.
There are a couple of questions asking your take on the fact that the Florida governor, DeSantis, just signed a bill into law about civics.
Well, I would look at DeSantis and look at the nature of, or what you would call, the momentum that has taken place since Donald J. Trump has been in office for the United States. that anyone that starts teaching civics is definitely being influenced by Donald Trump for the restoration of treaty and constitution enforcement relative to the republic, distinguished from the corporation operations, which it has a lot to do with the controversy that surrounds Donald Trump now.
I use his name so much.
That's a fact. But it is indeed necessary for the people. Because, of course, most of you who studied the works of Noble Drew Ali, known as Professor Drew, know that from the beginning he has been telling the people to enforce the Constitution. And that has been an integral part of the Moorish Divine and National movement. Of course, that's been breached by many too, which you also know. Which is also one of the reasons why we have been fortunate to even have a platform like this that Dr. Naila has maintained for all these years, whereas some of these things that has been suppressed in other platforms has been shared openly, even though we're still, been restricted by virtue of censorship for the restoration of the republic. And so when you're talking about the restoration of the republic, you're talking about constitutional enforcement and treaty enforcement at the same time. You must know that relationship. And so if you see DeSantis and others talking about civics, guaranteed they're teaching, they're leaning toward teaching proper government and de jure government, distinguished from de facto.
This is on a different subject, but there were a couple of questions that were the same. I believe this is the same. There was an earlier question about all of the bodies. What was your take on all of the bodies being found in Canaan land? And then another question said, please speak on the massacre in Canada.
One question at a time.
No, I'm saying the question about speaking on the massacre in Canada. I believe that it may be the same thing. You know that recently they found all the bodies of these indigenous or Aboriginal children.
Yes,
we're aware of that. The person wanted to know. I mean, the individual wanted to know if you were aware of that, and we are aware of that. But I don't know
aware before they published it.
Yeah, so.
The deal of it is the general public has not been aware of it on some degree and in denial of it on another level. It's not so much people haven't been aware of it. They've been in denial because they've been defending the corporations and the persons who they've been calling government, while deep inside fearing them, knowing that they were murderers. And what you would call little people sacrificers.
Yeah, we were told that melanated blood was very desirable to
absolutely because
so-called royals who would come over there and
exactly because of the energy and the melanin. They even used it for years to trying to artificially create or recreate the melanin or the spacesuit for the atmosphere of the solar system, known as melatonin. They've been murdering our people for centuries. And this is back to unum sanctum operations dum diversus, and our people being diverted into the fake race argument to divert them from what's really been going on for centuries. And that is cannibalism, little people sacrifice, stealing of their organs, and stealing of their crystal stream that you know as plasma.
And sexually, well, you can't say whatever they call that.
Well, you already know what it is.
The abuse. They've been abused.
And this is back to, like when you read the Christian Black Codes, where people have falsely been blaming Allah, Jesus, Muhammad, and Buddha for the organizations that they've been calling churches and mosques, etc., that they actually had nothing to do with, and that have actually been platforms for the actual opposite energy operators who've been calling themselves, and that must be qualified if you want to say Satanists and Luciferians, because those words are misused too. And that will be a totally different conversation. But they have used the different, even planetary energy designations that are ancient and corrupted them for their own personal use to do demonic things. So the best thing that you could call them, to be fair to Satan and devil type thing, would be simply demons.
Here's a question from Maquan White. Do you need to go through the MSTA to nationalize properly, or is there another way?
Now, I already sense the nature of the question coming from probably experiences that has been entertained by the question, and therefore the qualification. But I will say this: keep this in mind. Your Moorish birthright has nothing to do with any organization, entity whatsoever, for it is divine and it is natural. Any organization that attenuates any activity in relationship to it is a political act or platform by which, by the structure of organization, numerical organization, and principal construct through treaties and constitution is exercised, etc. But you are Moorish by blood, by birthright, not by any organizational structure. Don't confuse the two.
Noble Eighth Path says, Eightfold Path, nationality and naturalization, two different levels. I'm not sure if they want you to talk about them or just make it as a
nationalization. Let's make it simple for a novice or for a neophyte. Like, say right now, where we're located, in the private office of Dr. G. Most of you know her as Dr. G, and many of you share time with her with official hours with Dr. G.
Office hours.
So right now I'm speaking from one part, because she has more office area much more than what you see, including downstairs and also upstairs. Now, her son was here, and we were working together actually the other day, helping to clean up and do a few things that we're doing around here, rearranging things. In a principle of law, her son would be what you would call the native or the national. Myself or others who would help are welcomed, and we would be welcomed at the table even when she cooks and does her exotic cooking and stuff like that. However, our rights would be privileges under naturalization. Her son's right would be under nationalization. That would be the distinction. When you apply that in the nature of the extended families that we know as nations all around the planet, when it comes to the actual people of the land, they would be the nationals, or the true sovereign right claimants in that geographical, territorial jurisdiction, etc. And people who would come from other political jurisdictions, if they're in any social political agreement for stay or operations in that jurisdiction or territory, from a lawful perspective of documented operations, their position would be naturalization. So, as an example, if you or I left the Maghreb, Morocco, the most extreme west, North America, Morocco, and went to say, Manchuria, what you call China, and we wanted to rightfully and lawfully make stay there for, say, education. We're going to be there for a few years for an education at some university, or to do some research, anthropological or otherwise. Then we and plan to have stay there for quite some time. We would become naturalized Chinese citizens. Chinese would not be the pedigree. Chinese would be the political jurisdiction under naturalization. But if national, you cannot be Chinese national unless you are Chinese by pedigree. You see the point? Likewise with Russia or any other political, jurisdictional, territorial nation state. So the principle between nationalization and naturalization would be nationalization would refer to the de jure people or citizens of a particular nation state, and that of granted privilege, temporary rights conditionally for what you would call an alien or foreigner entering into or doing business in another political jurisdiction. Such beings would be naturalized. And so the naturalization acts would deal with them taking allegiance to the enforcement and maintenance of treaties and constitutions according to that nation state. And this is why, because these practices have been violated by virtue of colonial operations in contemporary times, which is why they've been telling people falsely that a driver's license is an identification card and getting away with it. And this is also why, until recent years, because of the problems that they've created, you haven't seen people who have been allegedly representatives of different nation states, why you have not been hearing them talking about national identity cards. But because it's been corrupting the political economic platforms of nations around the world, you're hearing more and more people who claim to be government talking about national IDs. This is funny. But you never see them enforcing it, because the point of it is they're private corporations and people who have been pretending to be nationals when in fact they're not. Were not and are not. It's kind of caught in kind of a catch-22 situation for them.
Questions? Okay. So here's a question. Well, here, I'll do this one. This came up a couple times. Who is it that wants to know? Tarik wants to know, Brother Taj, are you familiar with the sister out of Georgia, Chief Janice, dealing with the land patents?
The land patents basically have been issued by hybrid Europeans among themselves to steal our land. And though that process in its principle should be correct, but the people of the land have what you call aboriginal claims superior to all of those instrumentalities. However, superior to the mortgages and deed claims is the land patent that is acknowledged.
Here's another question, and I had to pull up my poem because I feel like you can respond to it, but I also want to share this poem. Yeah. Reynard G. Hines says, so if it's a God, what is he or she waiting for? Or is God in us and we need to act?
Now, again, I'm glad that question was asked, because it's also part of the paradigm of the purging that must take place among humanity, because there's an assumption of the God position that is totally and has been totally incorrect. And that must be worked out. And so in the nature of the question, on the surface, the question is loaded, because the question truthfully has been a part of the mental mind control training that the people have received, thinking that God means the creator when it does not. God is a verb transitive That means to call upon, to invoke, and to pour out, and is not a being whatsoever, nor is it the creator. Although the word is loosely attached to the source or the creative sources, taken as one, etc., and has been generally accepted. And often we will use that word in implying the creative forces. However, it is an improper usage. Unfortunately, but that's true too. And that must be worked out. And so, therefore, by people assuming that it means the creator, often people would construct in their mind, how can God stand by and let all this BS go on? And how come he or she or it ain't doing their job? Because the assumption has been that the God is going to save us or rescue us, when the real deal, the rescue will be within. It's in you, i.e., that's the truth.
Can I share when we gonna be?
Yes.
As a response to that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a poem I wrote 2016, July. It says, it's called When We Gonna Be, and hopefully this is also answering your question. Trying to figure out who we really want to be, but still fighting and settling for a false identity that distorts and conceals our true nationality while trading places with the real enemy. Wake up, get up. When we really gonna see? Do you know why there's no ground on which to stand? Because we're looking for redemption, unaware we're on our land. They've got us focused on returning to one small patch of ground when throughout the universe can our presence be found. We're embracing his Tory while neglecting the glory of our ancient existence and deity. Truth is, living like thugs and paupers is the real tragedy. We protest and march blindly like lemmings off an edge, but can't find time to study for some real knowledge. Predictably programmed for social response and reaction, oblivious to the fact that we're being strategically distracted by the coordinated efforts of so-called deep state factions. Will our ignorance help their plan to depopulate the land so robotic AI becomes their newest slaves as we continually cry out to their mythos, what must I do to be saved? Or will we rise above their lies and reconnect with the Most High, who's not distant in the skies, but inside you, where true divinity resides? Time to call forth the divine spark of light that decided with determined might to journey 9 months to a distant world to take up residence in a baby boy or girl. See, I'm not trying to raise a stink, but I am trying to get you to think on a more critical level. You must know who is the real devil and not be fooled by what you're shown. The jig is up. Their cover is blown. This stuff ain't real. It's all a dream tied to an elaborate hocus pocus scheme to keep everyone ignorant and under subjection and the world in chaos in need of correction. See, they've never played fair. They play straight down the middle. And right now, most folks being played like a fiddle. So we must stop looking for help to come from a system that was designed to keep us trapped without wisdom. I know for a fact we are the answer we desire to see. So tell me, my people, when we gonna be? Ashe.
Ashe.
It is us.
See, this is the deal. We've been trained under animal husbandry for so many generations to look for some demigods to come and save us from forced servitude and foreign unum sanctum dum diversus colonial operations and occupations, that we forgot that whole paradigm of thinking was introduced to us, but was not in the nature of the philosophies or the religions of our forefathers, but actually is a total mind control social solace system that was introduced to us generationally and gradually, until the point that we confuse that with our Asiatic African ancestors' Coptic philosophies, of which it has no part.
Here's another question from Daniel Tavares. How wants to know how this connects to the warnings issued about the coming global life support system collapse and biowarfare.
Yes, what you're seeing is The doctrine of discovery, unum sanctum, intercatera divinus, uh, operations actually being in fact and in reality countered for real on a global scale. That's what's going on. And so the dark priesthood that has been ruling the world, particularly since the fall of the Moors and the running of the Moors out of Iberia, and they will call it one of the celebrations that they call it is St. Patrick's Day.
Tag.
And they also refer to it as Tag Day. And they also refer to it in the negative, with a negative connotation that is not properly comprehended or taught. They'll say they're running the snakes out of Ireland. And since then, they have been corrupting both the culture, the different terms, they're corrupting the true knowledge of the snakes and serpent, etc., misjudging deliberately all of that culture, distinguished from its relationship metaphorically to the operations of Kundalini, etc., and has used the corruption and the dark side of Babylonian magic for ruling the world, and have actually contaminated the whole world and have people actually hating their own culture because it's being misrepresented by the hybrid Europeans, and also causing them to reject their own culture, not knowing the metaphorical and anthropomorphic different systems by which much of the culture has been promoted over the years, and therefore not being able to intelligently and rationally make the distinction between friend and enemy, friend or foe, truth and falsehood, which is what's really taking place on the planet today. However, because the people are beginning to think critically on all fronts and questioning all things, as should be, these things are in the process of working themselves out divinely. And like Noble Drawley always said, if I could just get you all thinking again, you'd save yourselves. And that is in process right now. And it's not limited to the Aboriginal Moors of North America. It is now operating on the planet at large, with all nations, all tribes, all political platforms. Not admitted by all, but that's what's taking place anyway. That's why I've reminded people, even though you're looking at logically and properly at all of these things from a metaphysical, cosmological horoscope on the geography of the planet, and also on the single units of the monads in their horoscopes, etc. I always remind people to also just in a more simplistic form, watch what Uranus is doing. That's not neglecting the issue of Saturn and the other planets, particularly ruling the Aquarian energies at this time. But just look at that, and then you look at the politics, and you'll see how the electrical charge is tearing up all of this stuff. And everything or anything that anyone claims to be, or any presentment that they make to the world in the manifest third degree and or third dimensional plane, that's coming from the nature of the energies of the priesthood from the Piscean era, is being dismantled and will not survive in the Aquarian light. And it's accentuated by Uranus. That's not a neglect of a refined analysis, cosmological, but I think that would help a lot of people who are not cosmologically astute yet.
Morsha America asks, do we send our suits to the corporate state courts?
You would, whenever there's a claim made, those are essential rebuttals, or what you call impropriate persona established for the record status. Because remember, usually when the because remember, state courts are not constitutional courts, so they're not courts. They just simply are not. However, because they're operating under with de facto authority, this is another reason why you issue bills of return of attender. And no, other than your cover sheet of your status correction, etc., is all is needed. Not all your paperwork. That's all. These writs, fundamentally on the surface, is all they need to know. It be correction of status. So there's no assumed in personam jurisdiction where it does not exist. So when the pre-assumed, because remember the assumed jurisdictional in personam jurisdiction that are operative in most of the instrumentalities that sent to you from them is with the assumptions of jurisdiction via the nom de guerre or the misclassification of the being in the first place. This is why it's only necessary to send even the cover of the status correction. All the other instrumentality is not even necessary because it's your business, not theirs. Their only business as being government or claiming to have authority of government, etc., in any capacity is enforcement of the Constitution and treaty. And if that's not presented to you, their position is fraudulent. They have no other service to you. Keep that in mind. And this is back to the problem also that many people have of expecting things from these people.